Hello everyone, welcome back to the Pathfinder 2E Party Composition Series. This is the last part of the support role, focusing on caster options for playing a support character in Pathfinder 2E. So to start, with this video I'm going to explain that really there's two categories of support, buffs and debuffs. The reason I didn't explain this so much in the Martial video is because debuffs are available to both marshals and casters, but buffs, for the most part, are a caster exclusive ability, with the exception of certain battle medicine healing abilities. So what's the distinction here? Well, buffs directly aid allies. That means they usually provide a numerical bonus to your ally's roll, such as applying a potency rune with runic weapon. They are more reliable than debuffs because they usually succeed without rolls, in that you just cast a spell and it takes effect. There's no chance of failure for the majority of them. Healing spells can technically heal less, but there's many ways around that if you're focusing on buffs. However, there is one disadvantage. There's limited stacking with buffs, and generally you can't manage to cast with... You can't manage to stack them too much, unlike with previous editions. So that means that you can only have one bonus of each type active at any one time. So really, if you're a caster fighting a powerful enemy, you generally want to go into debuffs. So one big bonus of using both is that debuffs and buffs stack because debuffs are applied to the enemy, whereas buffs are applied to your allies. So you can give your ally a +1 and the enemy a -1, which works out to an overall +2 for your ally. So that's why debuffs are specifically hindering enemies. They are slightly less reliable than buffs because most of them force saves of some kind. That's either a will save, a fortitude save, or a reflex save. All enemies have one save that is worse than their other saves. Sometimes two, it just varies. However, even though you fail more often, especially against higher level foes, debuffs usually succeed on a range of the enemy succeeding on their roll to the enemy critical failing on their roll with different effects. And usually the effect you should be expecting is actually where the enemy technically succeeds on their roll. So that kind of works out to a failure for you, but at the same time you apply a weaker effect, such as slow applying still a -1 action. So it can be very useful. And debuffs can also stack conditions on top of each other depending on the specific spell. Like you could impose the frightened condition, though that can also be imposed by, say, intimidation. And you could at the same time impose the restrained condition, which could also be imposed by grappling. And another way casters can contribute here is, as I've mentioned, the skill actions. Many casters have a skill associated with their casting statistic, which they are very good at, namely charisma casters, such as the bard or sorcerer, which can use intimidation, diplomacy, deception, or any other charisma-based skill like performance to apply the same conditions a martial support character could. And these are infinite use abilities, unlike spell slots, with the exception of cantrips. Okay, so I'm going to start here with caster-ish options. These characters play like casters, but they're technically not. It's a little complicated. So the first one's the Kineticist. This is actually a class which I can recommend for beginners. Most of the elements you can choose, with the exception of fire, that is, have support abilities of some kind, and the Kineticist really can be a very strong support class using elements such as water, wood, metal, air, etc. So you just have to pick the abilities which are support rather than damage, because most of their abilities come in the form of feats that you select every level or 2 levels. All of their abilities are infinite use, which means you don't have to worry about spell slots, and that can be a very nice caster-ish character for someone who doesn't want to deal with spell slots. So as a GM, whenever I have a player who wants to play a caster but really dislikes the concept of spell slots, I direct them to the Kineticist. The second one is one I will not recommend for beginners at all. It's the Alchemist, and they use alchemical items in a way that's essentially like spell slots. It's just they kind of have free pools of spell slots, and each of those pools are restricted to different methods. I'm currently working on a series with it. The first video released on April 20th. So if you're interested in it, you can view that video. But if you're new to the game, I would suggest if you want to play a character like an alchemist, you can look at the next page and select a caster. So, on the spell list front, every casting class has a spell list that they draw their spells from, and many of them also pull from another spell list, such as divine casters off the arcane list using deity granted spells. It just varies. However, there are some basic trends that can be thought of with each spell list. Note this is my interpretation, and some people may disagree with this analysis. So the Divine Spell List is the spell list I'm most familiar with. It has most of the best buff spells in the game, and it's very reliable at doing that. The classes which use the Divine Spell List, such as Cleric and Oracle, also add on top of that, making them some of the best support classes in the game. On the debuff side, the Divine Spell List has an okay selection, but it's fairly limited. Specific, like, again, drawing off the other lists can shift this, such as having a cleric that can pull a debuff focusing on reflex rather than will from the arcane list. It's pretty much the one limitation of it. So if you're going to build a buff-focused character, divine casters can be a very good option. But if you want to play a debuff-focused caster, it's better to look at other spell lists. So the Occult spell list has excellent buffs. It's very comparable to the Divine spell list. The only thing it's a little bit worse on is healing. It has less healing spells than the Divine spell list, in that it doesn't have heal. Instead, it has a spell which does less healing, but has another rider effect called Soothe. And it has good debuffs, but most of them target will saves. It has a limited selection of spells targeting Fortitude and Reflex saves, especially the latter of those two. But as long as you're not fighting mainly mindless enemies or undead, the Occult spell list is a great choice. And classes will shift this. Again, like if you're playing a bard, the bard can be a better support character than a healer based off class features. The third spell list is the Arcane spell list. It's kind of your classic caster list. It's closest to the wizard class, and it's mainly associated with it. Its main limitation is on the buff front. It has literally 0 healing spells. All of the other lists have at least 1. And it has a somewhat limited selection of buffs, but it still has, again, variety. So it's kind of what you make of it there. On the debuff side, it probably has the best selection in the game because they can target all saves and have a combination of the debuffs from the Occult and Primal spell list. So if you're building a debuff-focused caster, the Arcane spell list is a very good pick. But if you're playing a buff-focused caster, it's better to look at Divine or Occult. Then the last one's Primal. I'm the least familiar with this one because I just haven't had many players pick it. So the Primal spell list is mainly damage focused, but it has a okay to good selection of buffs and debuffs. It has a limited selection and limited amount of healing spells. It does have heal, which is as good as the cleric, but it doesn't have extra heal slots like the cleric. And it also has limited saves in that it doesn't really have many good options for targeting will saves. Why exactly have I been talking about all this save stuff? Well, to explain there, it's basically, as I said before, each enemy has one save which is lower than all the others. And if you can target all 3, this means you can always pick the lowest save. Whereas if you can only target 2 different saves, you have to pick the lower of those 2, which can work out to not much of an advantage. And if you can only target one save, that means that you will be weakened against at least 30% of enemies. It kind of varies based off your level and what type of enemies you're fighting. Because, like, for instance, beasts have a very low will save, but then a lot of will save targeting spells can't target them because they have the linguistic trait. So just pay attention before you pick spells and plan to use debuffs based on your campaign. So I'll finish up here with a couple of highlighted classes. Two of them I've mentioned before, the Cleric and the Bard. The Cleric has extra heal and harm spells, meaning you don't have to prepare them. And it's probably the simplest prepared Divine Caster, because the other options are the Witch and the Oracle, which are far more complex. The Bard has unique cantrips, which provide support abilities such as the infinitely sustained, like +1 to attack of the Maestro Bard, or other abilities by subclass. And it is a spontaneous occult spellcaster. It is probably the simplest occult caster unless you build a sorcerer, which is the next one on this list. The sorcerer can pick any spell list based off the specific lineage they have, and they basically have abilities which amp up their existing spells using a metamagic type thing. And all three of the classes have, they all have focus spells, which provide additional bonuses based off their subclass. I can't really generalize them because, like, the Cleric, for instance, actually has, for certain domains, damaging focus spells, whereas they might also have support focus spells. It just depends. And then I don't really have much personal experience with these last two, but I've seen comments on my channel and Reddit and Discord saying that these two classes can be nice for new players. So the first one is the Druid. I've heard it can be fairly easy to play, although you can complicate that with various wild shape things and animal companions and whatnot. And it is a prepared primal caster, but if you want a prepared primal caster, it's your main choice. Then the last one is the Wizard. I actually have seen a player in my game play it, and they were new to the game, and thus far it's going well. It's a nice class to pick if you want to be a prepared arcane caster, because you can have the widest selection of spells available. And if you're a player who really likes to dig into the books, it's very fun to have all those options. But if you don't want to go digging around in every page on Archive the Nethys, I do not recommend picking the Wizard, just like I wouldn't recommend picking the Alchemist. So that is all for today, and the end of the main videos and the Pathfinder Party Composition series. I am planning to release a couple of sample party builds in the coming week or two. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Thank you for watching.